These past couple of weeks have been a real doozy for the cybersecurity profession, where all of these supply chain risks have kind of come to a head. It's not about losing control of your data anymore. It's about losing control of your agency, of what you can actually do. It's about giving that over to a computer.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the TPRM Podcast. This week, we're really excited to welcome Aaron Stanley. He's the VP of Security over at DBT Labs, the world's most popular data transformation tool. He also ran the cybersecurity program over at Twilio for a number of years, so he's a guy who really understands what it takes to build and run a global security organization. And this week, in light of recent breaches, we're going to be talking about the importance of transparency in the vendor incident response process. And then we'll talk about why running a security team that actually listens to employee concerns can make all the difference. Lastly, we'll wrap up by discussing what customers should really be asking their software vendors about platform security. Let's get started. Hey, thanks for joining. This is Threats, Pitfalls, and Risk Myths, the TPRM podcast. And today, we have Aaron Stanley, who is running security over at DBT Labs, previously running security for Twilio, a couple of companies you very likely have heard of. Really excited to have you here, Aaron. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for inviting me, Nate. I really appreciate it. I have a lot.
Must be the highest honor.
Hope we have a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. We were just talking a moment ago about, DBT Labs more generally, and with a lot of the sort of concerns that have come up in the security world lately around supply chain, around vendor things, with Drift, with NPM. And I thought it'd be really cool we could talk about some of that, because you very likely have some excellent insights to both of those things, because DBT, and maybe you can give a quick intro, because for those that don't necessarily know what you all are doing there, but you're kind of running sort of a package repository for your own platform, and you have lots of integrations to other systems. So it'd be great if you can explain a little bit about what you all do there, and then we can dive into some of those other pieces.
Yeah, so DBT Labs we just celebrated our 9th birthday as a company, but was not originally founded as a SaaS platform. It was founded as a consultancy that would help customers do business intelligence work. And what the co-founders realized kind of early on is that in order to do that work well, they needed to create some tools. And so DBT was born as an open source project. And it has a fantastic open source community. We have thousands and thousands of free users and enterprises as well using the open source product. And then, of course, along the way, the company decided to commercialize that into a SaaS platform. And so we operate a SaaS platform that helps our customers orchestrate data transformation runs in their warehouses. And so we're warehouse agnostic, Snowflake customers, Databricks customers, Redshift, BigQuery. We give the data teams a way to collaborate on queries so they can share queries and work with each other's queries in order to model data into a transformed, useful state so that then business intelligence can run on top of it. And as you said, Nate, we have our own package repository. We have a place for developers who are working on DBT packages to put those packages, and we let our customers then use those. And we also have our own, internal issues being an open source project as well as a commercial project. We take open source dependencies. And so I sent a note to our entire leadership team just a few days ago about how these past couple of weeks have been a real doozy for the cybersecurity profession, where all of these supply chain risks have kind of come to a head. And we've done a ton of work internally to make sure that our own supply chain is up to date and safe, which it has been, but also being concerned about the open source community in general and making sure that we understand that we have obligations as a provider to harden our pipelines and make sure that our open source projects are hardened against those attacks ourselves. So we have two races that we have to win, right?
Yeah, you're on both sides of the fence there.
Yeah.
And when it comes to that, I don't know how much you can share, but I mean, are there lessons that you've had when it comes to being a provider of some of these packages and running a repository that the broader community, it'd be great if some of these practices were adopted by the broader community, and likewise, things that you've picked up from how the other repositories are being managed that you took internally sort of as a best practice? Like, are there anything that stands out for you there?
So I think there are two things that have figured largely in how I've oriented our security program for a while. One is we take our responsibility as a publisher incredibly seriously. And so we have gone to lengths to look for the practices and standards that we should follow as an engineering culture. And we have adopted OpenSSF as a way to harden our development pipeline and make sure that our projects are built in an infrastructure that has security built in by design. I think that that's very important. The other piece is, making sure that as we look at how we take dependencies from package managers, what are the ways to protect our production infrastructure and to protect our developer infrastructure, right? So we can have more stringent rules on what goes into production. You can't push versions that are end of life, for example. I think that's a good rule.
Great
not
idea.
to push into product.
Right.
But when you're working on a local development machine, do you really need to have the same kind of constraints and controls? Maybe that might be good practice, but we want people to be, developers to be able to experiment. And so we have to understand is there a different attack surface on the local environment versus the production environment? Should we treat them differently? Should we treat them the same? And I'm trying very hard to come to a point of view on how we should approach those things, because again, we want our developers to experiment. And if you look at the latest attack on NPM, it is only the stuff that is bleeding edge that it's compromised for a couple of hours and someone catches it, which is great for us. The chances of it getting into production are very low, but the chances of it getting installed locally on a developer's workstation that's working overnight in Europe and we're not awake and we can't see it, like that is a real threat.
Yep. Yeah. And it's one of those things. And I was just talking to Alex at HackerOne about the exact same sort of situation. The philosophy on that side was just, that vulnerabilities can cause issues, patch as soon as you can. But I think, it's worth considering the different use cases of going into production versus developers where, a lot of these packages are either doing info sealing stuff or generally trying to steal crypto for now, but there's nothing to say they couldn't be going after AWS keys and things like that. So, I think having that inform how you think about that as a risk is really kind of the best way to deal with it, because it's just different in those two situations. And for all of us, we're trying to balance letting developers work quickly and iterate and test, but wanting to manage risk in some sort of reasonable manner.
Well, I think one of the interesting newer developments in the last couple of months worth of these attacks is once that malware gets into a developer's machine through a project that has been compromised, it tries to take private projects that developer has access to and make them public and then spread that way. But also, if you're a company that cares about your intellectual property, if you have closed source code that you do not want to be out there, like that is a legitimate threat that exists on the local device that you have to be concerned about. We have, of course, a number of monitoring controls in place as a security team should. And I remember at one point asking my security operations team, hey, I know we had an alert that would tell us if a private repository changed into public, but sometimes we just do that. Like that is a normal course of operation for us as someone internally creates a project and then it's, for training purposes or for public consumption. And so they flip it to public. And so I wondered if we had squelched that alert at some point because it was too noisy. And I was told definitively, no, that is an important alert. We would never turn that off. If that happened to us, we would know it immediately. And I think that is a really important control.
Yep. I mean, I think it really highlights the importance of detective controls now. I mean, being protective and preventative is great, and we still need to do all of that, but really things are going to happen, and we can't account for all of that without kind of being unduly overbearing. So making sure that there's some way to detect when things happen so you can respond quickly is huge. And is it so? I mean, you have sort of this extensible architecture there, right? Like plugins and people can run these different packages. Do you find that when buyers are coming to you, like, are they asking the right questions to understand the risk? Are they asking the right things that, if you were in their shoes, you would be asking? And sort of, if not, what things should people be asking when it comes to vendors that have sort of the more extensible architectures that enable third-party code and plugins, things like that?
This question first occurred in my life a while ago when I was at Apple. And if you think about kind of the origin story of third-party application ecosystems, the iOS App Store has to figure large in your narrative. And there was a point in time where the company wanted to test and secure and essentially validate that third-party applications met very strict controls. And doing that is incredibly hard, even at small scale. You have obviously the cat and mouse game of, well, if we understand that, data exfiltration happens this way today, and it's pretty obvious that it's going to go through an HTTP port, cool. But then somebody says, well, what about DNS? That's another way that I can exfiltrate data and you can't catch me. So watching the network when you detonate a third-party application gets you some things, but not everything. And so trying to figure out, how do you test a untrusted third-party application and make sure that it is safe to run in your environment is an incredibly tall order. And so we've kind of come to this point where customers can certainly ask, what do you do in order to verify that the things that are going into your app store are legitimate or are safe or secure? And our answer has to be, well, that these are third-party applications and the source is available, and you do have to take some of that on yourself and be able to validate it yourself. And that the controls that we give you, like in our platform or in our application, are the way to limit access for any part of our platform. So whether it's ours or a third-party plugin that you've downloaded, you can very granularly control what any of it can do in your data environment. And that, I think, is the most effective choke in this.
Just limiting blast radius and understanding, because assumedly most people aren't going to be reading the source of most any of these because either they're not qualified, don't have time, any of the other sort of reasons. So, it seems like limiting blast radius is definitely one of the big things. And totally agree on the difficulty of doing this, not even just at scale, but even with a small handful, because there's so much context that you just won't have of maybe the thing is supposed to exfiltrate data because it's supposed to send it to, that could be the purpose of a given thing. And it's really hard to understand some of that. So, I think it's one of those challenges, like we were talking about with enabling developers, enabling your data folks. There's all these things that can drive business value that can allow them to move very quickly. But the trade-off being, you're not going to have time to vet all of this. And you can only do so much to prevent in that case if you're going to use those. Are there things when it comes to detection then that people should be asking about, either from their vendors or that they should be thinking about if their vendors aren't, that they should be, instrumenting or implementing?
I think that if we take our lesson from one of the biggest of these issues in recent memory, the SolarWinds style attack, that the way to control for a data exfiltration problem, for example, is to make sure that the systems that you're running don't exfil data anywhere that you don't expect, right? And build network controls and policies in place. Of course, you can have detective, but in this case, you might have a good run at being preventative. And so understanding what your systems have access to and what they shouldn't have access to becomes very important, and understanding the boundaries. Right. I do think that we can generally understand if we read, especially if it's interpreted code like Python code, you can probably do a quick review of a third-party plugin, just like you would of any open source product project that you were going to integrate into your product, if you're a software development company, you can try your best to understand if there are routines in there that are doing things that aren't related to the product's expectation.
Yeah.
But look, I think the flip side here is, as a buyer of SaaS platforms and other software, the seller can certainly tell me, here's the list of third-party providers that I take dependencies on, and they can make those disclosures in third-party risk management process. But do I believe that it's 100% complete? No, I don't. I mean, there's definitely stuff in there
before.
Right. So I'm taking a certain amount of risk that you, the seller, have done your due diligence in making sure that the things that you're adding into your product are not malicious. And so similarly, we kind of have to trust each other across the board when we're putting in these packages.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that always gets to the root of the problem is we have like these webs of trust, and I mean, you can trust insofar as you trust them. You have contractual obligations, and assumedly they have security basics in place that you've sort of reviewed. When it comes to some of these things, though, like if we think about having lots of API keys, like I assume DBT has, are there things that buyers should be asking just to better understand what that risk profile looks like, but also because I assume the more people are asking about it, the more visibility it gets, and the more security teams are now going to get funding and sort of resources to be able to better deal with protecting those, doing detection measures around those. Are there things that people should be asking their vendors when it comes to how they're securing tokens, things of that nature?
Okay, so let me there were two things packed in there. I want to take the last one first, which is, you assume that if a customer asks a question, it gets more attention, it might get funding. That is so vitally important for security leaders to understand. Every month, every quarter, every time I have the opportunity, I provide a notes from the field on the security side to the rest of the company, the leadership, to executive team, right? If a customer is asking for it, if one customer asks for it, then there are more that want to ask about it, and maybe they can't. Or, if you look at the question and you say, hey, that's a really good question, we don't have an answer for it, we have to go figure out the answer, that's a good question for other people to want to that they should ask, that maybe they aren't asked. So that is a incredibly important part of the security program generally, and a way to prioritize the work that you are going to do yourself, or that you want your engineering teams or your product teams to prioritize. Always listen and take the questionnaires and the questions that customers are asking and use those as ways to improve your product. And then on the other side, so the questions that I really appreciate customers asking have to do with, how do you handle multi-tenancy, right? How do you prevent one customer that sits in the same hardware stack that I sit in from impacting, having data leakage across borders, right? What are the ways that you're protecting my data, the credentials that I'm putting into the system? Like in our case, right, we're orchestrating runs in warehouses, which means we need credentials. Are you doing that with static keys, or are you doing that with OAuth tokens? And what are the options available to me as the customer there to protect my data in your environment? And then, of course, you ask the basic questions, get you to a general level of trust that the company is looking at these parts of the supply chain that they're assembling into the product, that they are doing the analysis and doing the diligence, and not just taking stuff bleeding edge off of some random package manager or generated by some AI, but that there's a process in place. There are structures that ensure that you're not just putting garbage code into the product.
Yeah. And I think, the point you made about asking questions and stuff, I think it's also important for people to remember, when you're asking 300 questions, those important ones get watered down then. So if you're asking about the cameras on the doors of the data center, whatever it might be that is in the silly questionnaires, the one thing that's always bothered me is that that waters down the things that are really important, versus if I ask the things that are really meaningful in the context of whatever the engagement is, that forces them to have really solid answers on those instead of, you can kind of hide some wishy-washy answers in amongst hundreds and hundreds of them. And I think people sometimes make the mistake, or often make the mistake, that more is better when it comes to what you're asking versus really focusing on what's important here and what could go wrong. I mean, I think like the idea you have about doing notes from the field and sharing that is super important, because people in security, we often get called a cost center, and being able to tie it to revenue like that at the time before anyone signed a contract is super important, and like the biggest way you can influence how your vendors are building.
And we always get back to this idea that there's a link between compliance and security, but compliance does not equal security, right? I can be compliant with all of the physical security standards that you might ask me about because I don't have an office. I'm compliant, but I have nothing to comply with.
I see the door is shut behind you there, so it's good stuff.
All of my doors always stay shut. The idea that we have a compliant program doesn't mean we necessarily have a secure program. And so the customers that ask the deeper question, and where they do say, okay, I see that you meet a bar that we have set out. However, I want to know more about that. I want to dig into the architecture as a part of my review, because you are an integral part of my data platform. Even if, taking DBT for an example, or even if DBT doesn't store your data or process your data firsthand, we do sit in that flow and we are part of the infrastructure. And so you have to treat us as a higher risk vendor, and then ask the deeper question, okay, let's talk more about your architecture. Let's talk more about the way that you take dependencies. Let's talk more about your business continuity plans, which are not, which are beyond the, do you have an RTO of 24 hours? Because that's my requirement. But like, tell me how you meet that, right?
Yeah, everyone always says yes to that. That's a yeah, of course, RTO, whatever, 24, sure, great. But there's a lot that goes into actually being able to back that up.
Right. And so there are customers who are actually more advanced, more mature, more experienced at this, who say, the questionnaire is one thing, but show me the work. And I think that's really important for getting you the funding as a security leader, making the conversation a bigger conversation. Because again, if one customer cares to go to that level, you'd bet that a dozen more want to, but maybe they can't yet.
Yeah, and I think it's, again, it seems like security folks were kind of deathly afraid of being the department of no, because for the longest time, that's how security was run. And it seems occasionally people have overcorrected to the other side, where introducing even a little bit of friction into that sales process is how you're going to improve your vendor's security. Of like, hey, this deal isn't closing because they're concerned about X. And I think we lose sight sometimes of the fact that actually is a huge point of leverage we have for securing anything upstream that we're pulling in. And, for people to partner with the business internally on whoever's buying it, like, hey, we're okay, you're going to be able to get this, but we want to be able to dive deeper to make sure we understand this and show them that this is serious. I think you can still be enabling the business to move quickly, and at the same time helping the security team, your counterparts at the vendor, by giving visibility to the importance of the work that they're doing to the rest of their company.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think just asking the question can spark actual progress. And trying to just say, well, it's a brand new AI tool that my boss really wants to use, I guess I should just okay it, will not necessarily make us better. It will not necessarily improve how we do engineering and how we build the web of trust.
And in fact, it makes it worse, because then you end up with sales and all the revenue and the CEO of the vendor saying, no one even asked about this. They don't even care. So why would we spend time on that? We need features. That's what's going to, deliver value here. And really this is the only point we can kind of interject that. So, I think it's overlooked and super important. But when it comes to, I know you've talked about the importance of not necessarily preventing things from happening, because we should still be doing that, but how do you know how to help when things do happen? And that could be detective measures, but also kind of more broadly. Could you maybe speak a bit more on how you think about that internally, how you balance those?
One of the things that attracted me the most to DBT as a company as it turns out, we actually live the values that we post on our webpage, which I don't know all companies can do. One of our most important values is transparency always wins. And that has been a big deal for me in my career, where I have tried to balance how do I respond effectively to like a real security incident, something that is impactful and has notification requirements associated with it and customers have been impacted by, and balance that with really giving back to the community and improving the security posture of other companies and giving people a set of guideposts. Because we value transparency so much, my goal in every single one of those interactions when something does go wrong is to handle it as swiftly and transparently as possible, right? Bad news should travel at the speed of immediacy. You should never try to control the situation first. You should always make sure that everyone who needs to know knows. And then as you work the problem, right, that their job is to support you in working the problem. As you work the problem, you communicate with customers exactly what you know as soon as you know it. And you have to strike that balance in favor of giving the customer a remarkable experience that they can then walk away from even a terrible incident feeling like they were informed, they were involved, they knew what was going on, they understood that there were problems that you were working on. And that open communication is what can save the relationship, because it actually, even though it's a really bad day, you've built trust from it.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's, well, you had, there was like a vulnerability disclosure, I think, with some package stuff that was tied to DBT, not like a first party package, but like something where people could write stuff. I noticed the way you all handled that was exactly in line with what you're talking about, where many other companies would probably have swept it under the rug and be like, hey, this isn't actually a vulnerability in our system. Like, we don't believe blah, 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 blah. And the way you handled it is exactly in line with what you're saying. And I think it really does build meaningful trust. You know, when I, as a CISO, am looking at a vendor and I see that they've responded this way, now I know that, hey, they're not going to be trying to hide stuff from me. If there's a problem, they're going to own it and they're going to tackle it. And I mean, realistically, what more can you ask for? Versus recently with one of these large breaches, like the page was set to like no index and maybe like was vanished a day later, and, you know, all of these other things. It's just two very different approaches, one clearly being led by legal and PR, and one being led with a mindset of like continuous improvement and transparency and building trust. And I think, you know, the former being a very misguided way to approach this. So it's, you know, it's really cool to see that not only are you leading with that approach that you've been talking about, but then to see it in action. And I mean, I think that does engender quite a lot of trust with all the customers.
It's such a tough thing to balance, because there are researchers and reports that come in and you look at it and you say, yeah, that's how it's built. That is a design choice we made, and we think it was the right choice. And so you end up on your back foot trying to defend a design choice that you made that might have downside, according to someone. And then there are some where you're like,
but
yeah,
it's a trade-off.
We didn't. Then there's the one where you're like, yeah, we didn't really think about that, or the world was different when we built it and the world has changed and we haven't kept up with it. And so, yeah, you're right. This was a design choice. We wanted it that way, but we now see that thanks to you, it may not have been the best choice. And so we're willing to go back and revisit that choice. And so instead of digging your heels in, trying to save a face, I think is what a lot of folks might think they're doing, to just admit that the world changes, and like your whole job is to iterate and improve and get better and learn and take in new knowledge and do the next thing. That's okay. We are all on a journey. We are all learning. 5 years ago, the world was different.
Yeah. I mean, I think the cruel irony there being that people try to do this to save face, when really it just has the exact opposite effect. Yeah. Anyone who cares enough to dig into it knows what's going on, and yet to meet someone who isn't going to understand your perspective if you're sharing like exactly the situations you mentioned and you're having a transparent discussion about it, like people aren't going to be mad at you about this. It was a thoughtful decision. We understand how you got there. It's more about what are you doing about it now. And it's just Yeah, it's a little sad sometimes to see people shoot their own foot when it's so easily avoidable just with transparency and building trust.
Well, I think we also, as CISOs, right, have to set that bar at a place where we recognize that you say in the process by which we determine whether or not you are trustworthy, right, and we will buy from you. If you answer no to one of my questions that I think is a basic thing, my response shouldn't be, okay, well, I can't buy from you now. It should be, well, let's get to the right yes. Let's figure out what you can do, how we can build the trust. If you're willing to work with me on it,
around this, all of that.
We have to set that line and say it's okay to be wrong or to have been wrong. It's not okay to be stubborn and to refuse to change in the face of evidence that you should.
No, I think that's totally it. And I think to your point on the world changing, you guys are building like some AI code generation or query generation or whatever it might be into the platform now at this point, right? So what does that mean to you from the standpoint of new security risks, attack surface, things that keep you up? I mean, there's obviously all the things that generally are to be worried about when you have AI generated code. And it's one that I'm sure, there's always pressure like, hey, we need to get this out because it builds so much value for customers, right? Like there's clearly a large demand for features like this. And then for those of us on the security side, you're just like, oh my God, but there's so many ways this goes wrong. How are you thinking about that more generally? How are you balancing the desire to get these features out there versus wanting to make sure you're also doing a really thorough job vetting the risks?
As a technologist, I'm like so excited about what's going on in the world right now. It's amazing. And when I get access to new tools, I am digging in and playing with them and trying to figure out how they can make my life easier. And in a lot of ways they have. And I've been so amazed by the tools that people have built on top of the Gen AI platforms. I really want to encourage the folks in my company to embrace those tools, to use them to make their lives better, to improve our product, to just, improve their relationships with people. They're phenomenal. Mm-hmm. I am also, for I think the first time in my security professional life, very afraid of things going south. And I think there are issues that have come up where we have not done a fantastic job yet of explaining why certain things are so problematic. So I think about AI browsers, right? And I had a conversation with folks internally that I said, I don't think we should be using AI browsers right now in the business. And they were like, well, what do you mean? It's just, if people don't put, sensitive data in them, isn't that fine?
If only it were so simple.
Exactly. And so getting to the point where I could tell the story and say, good, I've trained you well. I've trained you to be very concerned about putting data into AI tools. That's job one. Now we take the next step and we say, I am very concerned about you using non-deterministic tools that could be poisoned by people and you would have no idea. Because there's something hidden in a web page that gives the browser an instruction. Because the browser has access to internal systems, it goes and does things. So let's be very cautious in this world right now. And it is a different kind of cautious. And the next thing, I don't know what the next thing is to be cautious of yet, because it hasn't happened. The amount of kind of forethought and being engaged in what is going on that I have to do right now is way more than I've felt in the past. Like, I know people talk about this AI thing as, well, it's just like when things move to the cloud. It's just like SaaS. And it
not quite.
It's not quite. It's just so much more.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not about losing control of your data anymore. It's about losing control of your agency, of what you can actually do. It's about giving that over to a computer and having it decide without you even asking it what action it's going to take. And that could be, hey, Hal, the database is giving me a problem. Can you go debug it? Hal comes back and says, yeah, the database was a problem. I deleted it. No more problem. And you're like, that's not what I meant. So
I did have a branch vanish this week from that exact same sort of issue. And then I'm left like yelling at Claude, like, why would you do something so stupid? And now I feel stupid for yelling at Claude, and it's a lose-lose situation.
Oh, did Claude at least apologize profusely?
It did, and it told me, you won't believe this, it told me I was right. Yeah.
Oh,
great.
Yeah, ChatGPT constantly loves my ideas. It just thinks I have the best ideas.
I feel very good about myself. That's one of the nice upsides of the AI revolution is I just get a lot of positive reinforcement, and I feel much better about myself.
Yeah, but the amount of look, I need to balance letting people move quickly and letting them move safely. And right now, more than ever in my career, that is it feels almost impossible.
Yeah. And I think it's the transparency thing, though, that it comes back to that again, what you were saying, right? Because by being transparent with your own users and helping them understand the risks, instead of just saying you can't use this because AI is bad and it can leak data. Like, okay, fine, that's one thing. But helping them understand how these risks actually manifest, because it's not super straightforward to people if you're not really familiar with like how the systems work, and in the case of like an AI browser. And I think then right now you're seeing the payoff from all the transparency work that you've done, because they actually came to you to ask about it instead of like, oh, hey, we rolled out AI browsers to everybody. Isn't this great? And you're stuck sort of dealing with the aftermath. So, I mean, I think it seems like the work you've done there already is paying off quite a bit.
Isn't that funny? Like, so we've spent a lot of time talking about external trust, right, as a software provider. But there's an internal trust thing to this job too, which is that if you show people within your company that you are willing to work with them and get them to an answer that works, that they are way more willing to come to you when they have a problem. And yeah, in this case,
absolutely.
I have a Notion page where I've asked people to put AI tools that they want to work with, and they click a button and it runs an action. And then we can take a look at it in our AI working group. And that is in fact what happened in this case. Someone's like, I want to use, I think it was DIA. I really want to use DIA. So they put it in the table and they hit the button. And that gave us the opportunity to say, hold on, we don't pump the brakes often, but this is a place where we're going to do it.
I mean, you got session tokens, all this stuff in there. Who knows which are open, and I think like they can do cross-tab actions from pages they're loading, right? So I mean, there's a lot of ways that goes wrong, and I expect that we'll see major disasters in the news at some point from this sort of thing being exploited.
I hope not. I really hope not.
I mean, we can all hope. That's good. Don't lose that.
Well, I don't want it to set us back on this actual revolution that we're in. Like, I am having a lot of fun. I am doing a lot of cool stuff. And I don't want government to come in and overregulate and kill a market.
Don't think that is much of a problem here in the States at this point. So you'll probably be fun for a few years at least.
Yeah.
Don't say anything. We don't get canceled
on that. Hey.
Well, thanks a ton for jumping on. This is a super, super great conversation. Really glad you were able to come and share some of those insights.
Thank you. I very much appreciate it. I look forward to more conversations with you in the future.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the TPRM podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe and share it with a colleague. You can find more insights and resources over at tprmpodcast.com. And until next time, remember, trust nothing, verify most things, and keep building. That's it for this episode of the TPRM podcast. I'm Nate Lee. Thanks for joining me and my guest today. If you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app, leave us a review, and share the episode with your peers and colleagues. For more resources and insights on building business-aligned security programs and managing vendor security, visit tprmpodcast.com and connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll see you next time.